I'm going to be spending a lot more time in here with you lot because I love it in here. I fucking love it!
Okay, other folks that I've spoken to, academics, and
I used to get off stage and say, I would love some feedback.
people who are ultra high performers can afford to pay other people to do all the other stuff.
Appropriate or effective. He said, sincerity is a little bit more about, it was one of the most moving moments of my life.
On the horizontal axis, is
Flipped enough, but actually the research on this is really clear that you're not avoiding work when you procrastinate. In fact, a lot of our procrastination is focused on doing things that involve a lot of energy. You've seen people probably clean their entire houses when they're putting off a task. So it's not that you're being lazy, it's that you're avoiding negative emotions that a task stirs up. So for me, it's boredom. For a lot of people, it's fear or anxiety. I don't know if I can pull this off. I have an extreme case of imposter syndrome in this role. The challenge in front of me is too daunting. For some people, it's confusion. I haven't figured it out yet. And so I can't work on this. Exactly. Now, I think obviously in the experiment, lying was an easy way to show the effect. But in real life, I think the way that you want to apply this is to say, all right, I've got to find something about this task that's interesting to me. And then in the process of explaining it to somebody else, I'm going to convince myself because I'm hearing the argument from somebody I already like and trust. And I've also chosen the reasons that I find compelling as opposed to hearing somebody else's reasons. And so I think this goes to the point that you were making, which is if you're trying to find a hook to make a topic intriguing, you've got to figure out, okay, what is it that would make this fascinating to me? And in a lot of cases, what you're looking for is a curiosity gap. I think social scientists like to talk about curiosity as an itch that you have to scratch. So there's something you want to know, and you don't know it yet. So I would say, I tell my students often, like, take your least favorite class and find a mystery or a puzzle, like something that you just do not know the answer to. I've talked with our kids about this. Like, what really happened to King Tut? Do you know? Can you get to the bottom of that? And all of a sudden, you're like, I wonder. I need to Google it. And then I need to see if Wikipedia has credible information on this. And the more you learn about that, the more intriguing it becomes. And I think that's the beginning of the process of finding intrinsic motivation.
I see. So inherent in your answer is the idea that there's something wired into our neural circuits and therefore psychology that curiosity as a verb, the act of being curious and seeking information and I should say I define curiosity, and hopefully you'll disagree with me or agree. Either way, it doesn't matter as long as we can get a bit deeper understanding. I define curiosity as a desire to find something out where you are not attached to a particular outcome.
Yes. There's a huge body of evidence on what are the effects of extrinsic rewards on motivation and performance. And I think the latest conclusions, if you look at the latest meta-analyses, so huge study of studies trying to accumulate what's the average effect of adding a financial incentive to a task that wasn't incentivized before, or to a job where you were paid salary and now we're going to give you incentive compensation. There is a boost. So in general, people are more productive when they're incentivized for their output, but these incentives are better for motivating quantity than quality. So you see people get more done, but they're not necessarily more careful or more thorough.
Are they less careful and less thorough?
No. Actually, there's still positive effects on average. They're just weaker. And of course, you could then start to say, well, how do I incentivize being fast and careful? Mm-hmm. But I think where we do have to be really cautious is there's an undermining effect of extrinsic rewards on intrinsic motivation. And you were alluding to this earlier, dating back to the early 70s, where we know that if we take an interesting task and then we pay you for it, you might conclude that you're only doing it.
The explanation, I was getting my morning sunlight and therefore I'm X number of minutes or even hours late, would have been completely fine.
I figured as much.
Yes, absolutely.
That's a built-in acceptable excuse with you. I think everybody experiences a version of this, and it's definitely gotten worse with social media and with smartphones. I think so. One of the most startling data points for me was Gloria Mark first put this on my radar. Before COVID, the average person was checking email 72 times a day. How do you ever concentrate for more than a couple minutes if you're self-interrupting that often? You can't. Brigitte Schulte has a great term for this. She calls it time confetti. And she says, we're taking these meaningful blocks of time and we're slicing them up into these like tiny little dots of confetti. And not only can we not accomplish anything, we're also eroding our own sense of joy because it's really hard to enjoy the 30-second blip of time that you get on a task. And I think we know a lot more about the existence of these problems than how to solve them. But one thing we do know is blocking out uninterrupted time is meaningful. There's a great Leslie Perlow experiment where she takes engineers and she has them, she sets a quiet time policy.
At night for him, but it could really be any time of day, deliberately making his body as still as possible and forcing himself to think in complete sentences. Rick's creative process, although it includes a lot of different things, has a lot to do with also getting very still, lying down. Okay, other folks that I've spoken to, academics and artists, have referred to getting their body into motion but quieting their mind. So these are two opposite processes. In one case, the body is still, but the mind is deliberately very active. In the other scenario, the body is very active, but they're making their mind sort of in free association. Not still, but they're not deliberately thinking about any one thing.
When you ask for feedback, you end up getting two groups of people. You get cheerleaders and you get critics. And cheerleaders are basically applauding your best self. Critics are attacking your worst self. What you want is a coach, which is somebody who helps you become a better version of yourself. And the way you get people to coach you is not to say, give me feedback, because they will then look at the past and tell you what you screwed up or what you did right. What you want is to say, can you give me advice for next time? And then they look at the future and they'll give you either a note on something to repeat or something to correct. And this is such a subtle shift, but it can make a big difference. Andrew, one of the things I found myself applying this to a lot is after giving speeches. I used to get off stage and say, I would love some feedback. And you get back a bunch of, oh, I really enjoyed that. Thanks. What do I do with that information? I'm trying to learn how to get better. And when I shift the question to say, what's the one thing I could do better next time? It's like, oh, don't open with a joke. The audience couldn't tell you were joking. Frequently, it's give me a little bit more of a through line. You focused a lot on a bunch of interesting points, but I lost the connective tissue. And those actionable suggestions are much more likely to come when you just ask for a tip as opposed to an evaluation.
Oh, that's so good. I'm going to just pause for a second. I've never taken a pause. I realize that I'm taking a bit of a leap from your study on intrinsic motivation and low performance in other domains. But to me, cleaning a toilet is it's boring for all the wrong reasons, right? As you said,
you do not want that to be an exciting task.
And listen, I mean, if I had to do it for a living, I would, right? And I would try and do it as well as possible. And right. So, well, I found that study to be particularly interesting because I think that these days we glorify high performance, even quote unquote peak performance, something we can talk about, and we forget that. Yes, oftentimes people who are ultra high performers can afford to pay other people to do all the other stuff. But I have to say, in knowing some ultra high performers and in knowing some people in the billionaire bracket, there's a high incidence of mental health issues, frankly, and lack of satisfaction with life that maybe even comes from not having to do anything besides the things that you find most intrinsically rewarding. We all think that, if I could, I would spend all day doing the things that I find most intrinsically rewarding. But maybe there's something about this push-pull. We know the brain works in push-pull with almost everything, that having some experiences each day that are kind of like, this is a thing again. Do you think that heightens our level of satisfaction for the things we really enjoy?
There was a cultural critic, Lionel Trilling, who wrote about the idea of sincerity as opposed to authenticity. And I really like this distinction. He said, when you try to think about being authentic, you're trying to bring the inside out. And to your point, Andrew, that's not always appropriate or effective. He said, sincerity is a little bit more about bringing the outside in. So pay attention to the person you claim to be, and then try to become that person. And that was a little bit of an aha moment for me. I realized, there are all these people who say, well, you should walk your talk. And I think that's good advice. I might even go a step further and say, maybe you should only talk it if you're already walking it. Maybe that would help us avoid hypocrisy. Why didn't I think of that? oh, yes, I can do that. I know people who are going to be in the audience. So I asked a couple of friends to sit in the front rows. And I locked eyes with a couple of them, and my nerves went down a little bit. So a couple weeks later, Joanna's getting ready to be in a school play, and she's also shy and introverted, and she's nervous, and she asks us for advice. And instead of telling her what to do, I said, well, what did you suggest to me a few weeks ago? And she remembered, and she said, look for a smiling face. And it was one of the most moving moments of my life. Like, Allison and I got to the play, and she looked at us and she beamed. And I just I think what I learned from that experience was kids need to feel that they matter. And most of us think about mattering as showing kids that they're unconditionally loved and giving them the support they need. But we forget that part of feeling that you matter is feeling that you make a difference. So as a kid, feeling like you have something to contribute. As a parent, asking my daughter for advice, that boosted her confidence. And I think that this is, I've come to call this when Jihye and I started this research on procrastination, she had come to me, she was a very creative doctoral student, and she said, I have my best ideas when I'm procrastinating. Mm-hmm. And it was one of those moments where I didn't believe her, but I thought it was an interesting enough idea that it was worth exploring. And I said, show me, let's get some data. Let's see if we can test this. And she ended up gathering data in a Korean company where she surveyed people on how often they procrastinate and then got their supervisors to rate their creativity. And sure enough, found that people who procrastinate sometimes were rated as more creative than people who rarely do, like me, the precrastinators. And I remember asking her, what about the chronic procrastinators? And she's like, I don't know, they never filled out my survey.
Yeah, as I recall from that paper, there's kind of an inverted U-shaped function with procrastination on the vertical axis and creativity on the horizontal axis. Flipped, sorry. Okay, so explain to me then the relationship between procrastination and creativity.
Yeah, so basically the peak of creativity is in the middle of procrastination.
Ah, okay, got it. And
yeah, there's an upside down U curve there. And so then I thought this was fascinating. So then we go into the lab to say, can we replicate this? Can we control it in an experiment? And the hardest part of that was, how do you randomly assign people to procrastinate? To my knowledge, never been done before. And we eventually figured out that we could give people a bunch of tasks to do and then tempt them with highly entertaining YouTube videos that were sort of placed on their screen. And we put different numbers of YouTube videos there so that if there's only one, you're not tempted to procrastinate much. If there are 4, you're probably going to get sucked into a little bit of a YouTube spiral. If there are 8, you might be putting off the task that's much less exciting than watching Jimmy Kimmel's mean tweets, for example.
And this was done in a fairly natural.
So, I don't want to know about 3% week on week. I want to know that we're killing the opposition. I want to be cutting their throats. Our rivals should be checking in up back of their chauffeured cars because they can't believe what we did. So fucking spicy. So true. Something everyone knows